Everybody, welcome to another episode of Conversations with Tom. I am here with the absolute legend, Richard Dawkins, and we are going to be talking about his latest book, Outgrowing God, and hopefully a whole bunch of other things. You've written such a library of seminal works that revolve around rationality, the pursuit of truth, secularism as a power for good, and wanted to dive into something that I'm particularly obsessed with, which what is the advantage of truth? Why do you think it's so important for people to start there?
From an evolutionary point of view, I think that truth probably helped you to survive. I mean, you need a realistic assessment of where the lions are, where the waterhole is, and all that kind of thing in our ancestral past. Today, I think it's perhaps even more important, where we're actually assailed by political leaders who believe in alternative truth, where they actually want to distort truth for their own purposes. So I think that truth is the biggest weapon against demagogues, and demagogues are one of the things we have to deal with today.
So in a world where truth is routinely distorted, where you get social media rabbit holes where people can create that sort of echo chamber around themselves, how do people, because I don't know that everybody ends up there on purpose, to be quite frank. So how do you recommend people approach thought or thinking, or to make sure that they are on a path of rationality?
I fear we all, to some extent, are susceptible to the echo chamber effect, and it's a thing we need to fight against, and I try to fight against it. Believe in evidence, believe in rationality. The organization that I'm a part of, which is the Center for Inquiry, which has merged with my own foundation, the Richard Dawkins Foundation, is all about rationality, all about skepticism, all about testing propositions for their truth. And so we have, for example, a lawsuit at the moment against homeopathy, which not only doesn't work, but cannot work.
Define homeopathy.
Okay, this is the pseudo-medical belief, it goes back quite a long way, that the way you treat a disease is by, or a problem, is by giving a very, very small dose of whatever the offending thing is. And by very, very small dose, I mean very, very, very small. I mean, they dilute and dilute and dilute and dilute and dilute, so much so that I think James Randi once calculated that they think that the more you dilute it, the more effective it becomes, which is crazy, obviously. And he calculated that for the most effective, according to them, homeopathic remedies, you would need a volume of water the size of the solar system with a single molecule of the active ingredient in it. And so that's homeopathy. And what our lawsuit is about is not to prevent people selling it, but to prevent people putting it on the same shelf as proper tested medicines. So you're looking for a remedy for a cough or a cold or whatever it is, and you look along the shelf and you see homeopathic remedies sitting right next door to proper remedies. And that's what we're fighting against. They must have a separate shelf called homeopathy, and preferably also called, by the way, this doesn't work.
What is it about, because I find there's a certain type of person that's really drawn to that. What is it about human evolution that's led us to have what I will lovingly term the woo-woo gene, where there's just some people that really respond to a more mystical answer versus...
It does seem to be, doesn't it? I mean, one of the things that's a bit depressing is that when people give up religion, they sometimes switch to woo-woo, as you say. It's as though they somehow can't quite divorce themselves from nonsense. I mean, what we want to do is to switch from all kinds of supernatural nonsense to rationality, evidence-based thinking, critical thinking.
Is the notion of a God neuron real? Like, is there a region of the brain that, when faced with the supernatural, creates a neurochemical state where you feel that profound sense of awe and connection that people are chasing?
I would hesitate to say a neuron. I mean, I think that human brains are susceptible in that kind of way. And I think it's one of the weaknesses of the human brain. Understandable, perhaps, but I wouldn't call it a single neuron. No.
So, and I definitely say that more as just like when I step back and I look at this and I think, okay, as somebody who, one, full disclosure, I believe that a level of self-delusion is tied to happiness. So there is, like, I'll often tell people when I'm thinking about myself, I care necessarily less about what is true because I'm probably more likely to believe something negative. But because I want to succeed at a certain level, I'm obsessed with accurately identifying the world the way that it is and not the way that I wish it were be. So homeopathy is a great place to start because you're looking for a health-based outcome. And ultimately, health-based outcomes come down to you're either alive or you're dead. These are pretty like binary things. They're very serious consequences. So that to me is a really interesting place to start. So if you have somebody who they have a neurological state that they are chasing that I will, in a generous framing, I'll call awe. And I will say that awe is arguably one of the most profound and enjoyable states. So if when I'm presented with this notion of, hey, there's this magical way to take this compound, dilute it, and it becomes almost like a divine moment, some magical, mystical thing that I can't explain happens, and that speaks to that sense of like connection and wonder that I have, which it doesn't with me, but I'm just saying, like, if I were to guess at what makes people go for that instead of Tylenol or, something that we know and can test and measure actually has an impact. Is the hope by shining a light on that, if it really is a real neurological phenomenon, is the hope that by shining a light on that, people can sort of talk themselves through it?
Yes, I think I would make a contrast between, say, astrology and astronomy, where both of them tap into that feeling of awe that you describe. And when people talk about Jupiter moving into the second house of Aquarius or whatever it is, that has the same kind of frisson that you can get from talking about galaxies and galaxies rotating and we moving around the galaxy. It's the same kind of frisson of awe that we get. But one of them is nonsense, and the other one is true and beautiful. Beautiful because it's true. And so we want to promote the astronomy and everything like that, like evolutionary biology, like geology, like physics. These are all wonderful because they're true, but they are wonderful. And the thought that you can actually understand the universe in which we are and why life arose where it did and why it developed in the way it did, that is absolutely wonderful. And to deprive children of that wonder is an act of wanton vandalism, cruelty.
That is something I will very much agree with. Like when you stand on even just stand somewhere where there's no light pollution and look up at the sky, and that sense of like seeing the sky for the first time and being so ridiculously small, was that to create that sense of wonder in the face of the real natural world? Was that the goal with something like Outgrowing God, which I know you aimed at a younger audience?
Yes, very much so. The first half of Outgrowing God is about sort of debunking God in various ways, beginning with there are so many different gods that people have believed in, and then moving through the Bible and how unreliable it is, and then to morality and how we don't need God for morality and so on. Then the second half of the book is about science, mostly evolution, because that's my subject, and also that's because that's probably the main reason why, from a scientific point of view, people do believe in God. They look at living things, they look at the complexity of living things, and they think, well, that has to be designed by some master engineer, some master designer. So the second half of the book is largely devoted to dispelling that illusion. And then the final chapter is about the more wondrous, deep questions of cosmology, the origin of physics, the origin of the laws of physics, what happened before the Big Bang, things like that. And the idea is taking courage from Darwin. Darwin solved the big problem in that field, which was explaining life. Because life really is, until you understand Darwinism, life is deeply mysterious. Darwin solved that, and that should give us the courage to realize that one day we will solve the other problems, like the origin of the laws of physics. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, that to me, the question, and I've heard you talk very eloquently about Einstein may have done a bit of a disservice by always using God language, but his notion of, I want to know God's thoughts and everything else is just details. That's always rung with such a beautiful mystery to me. I love that quote. And one of my employees here has a degree in neuroscience, and she was just absolutely transformed. You have shaped her view of religion as an adult. And when she was telling me the story, she was saying there was such a smile on her face, as if you had opened that door of wonder for her. There was no sense that you had diminished something. It felt like she had traded one thing in. Maybe that had served her very well when she was younger, whatever. But after encountering the ideas of that sort of pursuit of truth and opening yourself to the beauty of what is real, it was very obviously impactful for her. Is there something that you think particularly in this book or in any of your other books, like if you had one thing to tell somebody and you wanted to open that door of wonderment to the real world, the natural world, however you want to define it, what's that thing?
What you say about her, of course, is music to my ears. That's wonderful to hear. I wouldn't pick on one thing. I mean, the whole shebang, the whole of life, everything about it. I mean, in this book, Outgrowing God, I pick on one or two things, like the chameleon's tongue, octopus skin. I mean, these are just two out of millions of possible examples you could choose. Everything about it is wonderful, about life is wonderful. And in my other books, like The Blind Watchmaker, I picked on bat echo ranging, for example. In Climbing Mount Improbable, I picked on vision and I picked on spider webs. In this Outgrowing God, I picked on the chameleon's tongue and the octopus skin. The octopus skin, changing colour from second to second, not like a chameleon which changes colour from minute to minute. Octopus and squids and cephalopods generally, cuttlefish, change colour from second to second, and they can actually kind of play movies over their skin, almost literally play movies over their skin, at sort of real speed.
Have you seen, there was a recent video that I saw that was, admittedly, they don't know what it was doing, but it looks exactly like the octopus is dreaming. And it's rapid eye movement, and its skin is like changing color so fast. It was crazy.
I think they think with their skin. I mean, I've got on record as saying that.
Whoa.
And dream with their skin is a lovely thought too.
That's really interesting. When was the first time that you saw something so profound or read something so profound, whatever that moment was, that made you go, I'm going to be an evolutionary biologist? What was that thing that just slapped you upside the head?
I don't think that happened to me. I think I had the other way around. I kind of got to Oxford and in my second year there started getting interested in the sort of philosophical questions. I don't think I ever had a kind of natural history. I do plenty now, but there wasn't one that hit me over the head when I was young and put me into that
What
field.
are some of those things now?
Oh gosh, well, I just mentioned some of them. I mean, just things I put into my book.
And what is it about that? So I will say, when I saw the octopus, the thing that freaked me out, and I would guess maybe this isn't what you were drawn to, but when I saw what looked like an octopus dreaming, I thought, oh my God, they're more human than we think. They're basically the aliens we've been waiting for. Like all the wonder, like if an octopus came from outer space, we would freak out.
Yes.
But the fact that it's in our oceans, we're like, oh, well, it's always been here.
That's
so
right.
The way that it made me feel this, like, oh my God, it's us. Even now, just telling you that, I'm getting the chills. Is it the nature of evolution that when you see how complex it becomes that gives you
from
awe?
an intellectual point of view, yes. But I mean, you're right about aliens. When I once went to a lecture by a man who was doing research on octopuses, and he began his lecture by saying, the thing is, these are the Martians. And that's right. I mean, they are very, very alien. And they seem to be very intelligent. I think we should give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they probably do have feelings.
I don't know if this is actually true, but I heard one time that it is illegal, where I don't know, but illegal to operate on an octopus without anesthetic, because the assumption is that they're so highly developed.
I would hope so. I mean, I would like to think that's true. That's true certainly in Britain. I think in America of vertebrates. And I think octopuses, cephalopods generally, have been admitted to that charm circle, whereas arthropods haven't, I think.
Yeah, that to me is deeply fascinating. So, what do you say when the blind watchmaker, I think, makes a really amazing. It gives an amazing example of how you get something so complicated, but yet leaves these telltale signs of things that are so obviously nonsensical.
Yes.
If you were thinking of intelligent design, walk people through that aren't familiar with the nerve that runs through the giraffe's neck.
The laryngeal nerve, which all vertebrates have in one form or another. In our fish ancestors, the equivalent nerve went to one of the gills, and it passes posteriorly to a major blood vessel in the chest of, what do you call it, of a fish. When the fish started to evolve and develop a neck and became eventually mammals, the nerve started to get stretched in a detour, because once there was a neck, when I start again, it starts in the brain, and in mammals it innervates the larynx, the voice box, and it doesn't go directly to the larynx. It goes straight past the larynx, down into the chest, loops around one of the main blood vessels in the chest, and then goes back up to the larynx, which is a detour. In a giraffe, it's a very, very big detour indeed. And the reason for it is history. As I was started to say, in our fish ancestors, that same nerve passed south of that equivalent blood vessel. And so it wasn't a detour, it was the direct route. But when the neck started to grow longer, it became a detour. And it wasn't a very big detour to begin with, it was just a slight detour. And as it got longer, in evolution, the marginal cost of each successive increment in the detour was slight. And so that it wasn't worth it to radically change the embryological process and jump the nerve over the blood vessel. That would have required a major rethink, so to speak, of the embryology. And so it just got longer and longer and longer and longer. And in the giraffe, as I said, it's absurdly long. So it's a wonderful example of how history explains what is obviously bad design.
Yeah, that's it. What I love about that is when you think about how complex we are, the real temptation is to jump to, well, obviously there's thought behind this. Yes. It's so calculated. But when you start to see example after example like that, it really gets pretty fascinating.
You don't really need that. I mean, it's a silly inference, actually, to say that it must have had a designer, because I think, as you said earlier, you've still got to explain where the designer came from, and so you haven't actually done anything when you said that there's a designer. It's a non-explanation.
Yeah.
What Darwin provided was a real explanation, which goes back to primeval ultimate simplicity, and then gradually increases the complexity over time. That's what you want, and that's what we've got.
Do you have a mechanism, a metaphor that you use to really imagine time? I've heard you say, and I think this is so right, people just cannot conceive of how long a million
years is. There are many.
I
mean, and they're all equally good, really. The one about making a clock be the whole of geological time. And humanity came on the scene 5 seconds before midnight, that kind of thing. Another one I like is you stretch your arm out and you say, the middle of my neck, my thigh, is the origin of life. And then my fingertip there is the present. And the dinosaurs don't come in until about my wrist there, maybe the middle of my palm. The dinosaurs are very recent compared to the time that it's been available. And humanity comes in at about near the end of my fingernail. And the whole of recorded history, the ancient Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans, all of recorded written history is the dust in one stroke of the nail file.
Yeah, that is that I think has that same sort of pale blue dot effect for me,
Yes.
where it's like,
Yeah.
man, it's the unimaginably long amount of time that it's taken us to get here is so massive. And ultimately, everything we think of as important and world shaking and defining everything that we know is this just infinitesimally small dot floating through space.
Yep.
That is, that to me is really, really interesting. Now, when you begin to tease out sort of, okay, we have selfish genes, which want to make sure that they replicate. And so they're going to do things that maximize that behavior, whether for the person or for the lineage, so that, a mother would sacrifice for her kids. That makes sense, especially if she's past her age of reproduction. The kids are reproductively viable. She is not. And so you would expect some sort of mechanism to arrive on the scene for that. My real obsession is more along the lines of epigenetic changes and how much malleability we really have. So if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have, without intending it, but I would have said something that sounded a lot like being a blank slate. The more I research, especially Steven Pinker, and you get into reading the actual blank slate and realizing just how much we come pre-programmed with, it gets very interesting. But I am still particularly fascinated by the amount that we can change. Do you think at all about adaptation as even if it's just cultural, like adaptation within a single lifetime, or does that feel like just the absolute wrong word?
Well, I wouldn't use the same word, I think. I think it's very important, obviously, cultural adaptation is very important, but it comes about through such a different mechanism than Darwinian adaptation that it's important not to confuse them. Like you, I greatly admire Steve Pinker's Blank Slate, and Matt Ridley has written a similar book, which I recommend to you. Nature via Nurture, it's called. So I think that for partly political reasons, nature is underestimated. I mean, I think there's a kind of political pressure.
How so?
Well, it's becoming unfashionable to suggest for one single moment that there might be genetic differences between male and female, for example. Right. I mean, you get tarred and feathered if you say that.
Yeah.
Obviously, cultural influences are immensely important, but so are hormonal influences, and you can't really deny that. And there is a kind of tendency for political reasons to attempt to downplay the importance of biological
Have
influence.
you, by any chance, this is an outside shot, this does not strike me as your kind of book, but have you read the book A Billion Wicked Thoughts?
No. Say it again?
A Billion Wicked Thoughts. Richard
No.
Dawkins, you must read this book.
Okay.
It is salacious, to say the least.
Yes.
But it was basically these Google engineers who said every time you try to study sex, you can't get real results because people are going to lie. They're uncomfortable about it. So even if you say, this is all anonymous, don't worry, you know that people are going to they're going to hedge their bets. And then these two engineers thought, wait a second, there's actually been the largest experiment on human sexuality ever done already, and it's called the internet and anonymous searching. But you can actually tie it back to certain amounts of data. So they went through, I don't know how many millions of searches, and they began to just group things. This had a profound impact on me. So I know you don't know a lot about what we do at Impact Theory, but we're a media company. So ultimately our goal is to make film and TV. But I want to make film and TV that help shape culture so that people begin to think in a certain way that will empower them and make their lives more fulfilling. Long story. So when I'm reading this book and I'm seeing the profound difference between what men search for as far as porn goes and what women search for, it is crazy. And they took, I should say, passages of males describing sex in like basically smut books, and then women describing sex in their version of erotic novels. It is the exact same act. It is hysterical, the difference. And it was one of those where I was like, the differences aren't slight, they are massive. And so that was one where I was just like, as a person who makes film and TV, you must know your demographic, because the way the brain responds to stimulus is so different from men to women. And people can tar and feather me all they want. It's just like, that's just naked in the data. Yeah. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying they are very different.
Wasn't it Google where somebody was sacked for?
James Damore.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That whole thing, look, I think ultimately this all flips. And so here's the good news. The position that myself and my wife and co-founder are in, it's like, we want to help and we want to impact people, but we're not beholden to anybody. We're self-funded, blah, blah, blah. So for us, our thinking is the only way forward is the one that is real. And whatever real is, then we need to get to real. Now, I personally think that the only thing that's really interesting is when you get into differences, it's going to be at the tails, right? If you're thinking of a bell curve. So sure, at the tails, there's a lot of difference. It's a lot of fun. For the most part, people that take up the bulk of the curve, you're all going to be able to do whatever you want.
There's huge overlap.
Yeah, it's like
in the bell curves, yes.
So whatever you want to do, you're going to be able to do. It's not like any one race, sex, ethnic, anything is going to outperform the other. The vast majority of all the bell curves overlap, so I don't give a shit about that. But what I find utterly fascinating is the sort of revelatory nature of what happens at the tails to hint at sort of where we've been pushed evolutionarily to go. So anyway, check out that book. It's I think very, very interesting.
I will, and I applaud what you're saying about what matters is the real. This, of course, is the mission of the Centre for Inquiry and the Richard Dawkins Foundation, that we are out there to try to promote the real and truth and skeptical examination of evidence-based reality. And it's a very, very important mission because, as I said earlier, we are living in a time where reality is being actively distorted, and it's very important to counteract that.
So what's interesting to me is I think some of that distortion falls in line with what you call conjurors, what I'll call magicians or mentalists. Yes. Darren Brown impacted me so dramatically, and for a UK audience, they will know instantly who that is. For an American audience, he's sort of, there isn't really an exact correlate because he's a mentalist, so he's not doing card tricks, but he's using similar things. But I was watching a video on a flight of all places, and it impacted me so profoundly. I thought about quitting my job, moving to the UK to study with him, because what he's able to get you to think you're seeing is so incredible. Do you think there's overlap between a magician, stroke conjurer, and some of the stuff that we see happening in the realm of politics? And by that, I mean specifically that they are aware of the psychological sort of illusions and they exploit them.
Well, Darren Brown called himself a mentalist, and he gives, I mean, his act is to pretend to read people's thoughts and to influence people's thoughts. He's just a conjurer. He's just doing tricks like anybody else. And he even pretends to be using techniques that he clearly isn't using. I mean, for example, he will suggest that when he appears to telepathically read somebody's thoughts, he will say, okay, I'll explain how I do it. Did you notice in my patter before we started that I kept on mentioning the sea and sailing and ships and giving you the impression that he was suggesting to the victim something to do with the sea? If that were all he was doing, then he would be right statistically, maybe a majority of the time, but he wouldn't be right all the time. He's right all the time. So he's doing tricks like any other magician. So, I mean, I wouldn't be too spooked by him if I were you.
No, definitely not spooked, but admittedly, some of what I think he is pulling off may be entirely true, sort of sleight of hand, whether it's, somebody in his ear or whatever saying something that they picked up from the audience. And that would be less intriguing.
Yes.
But certainly his ability to enrapture a crowd, to get everybody focused in one place, to make the performance seamless. I don't think I've ever seen it done better. Like, he definitely creates this sort of incredible environment.
Yes. And
to create that environment, I think even though when he is saying I'm using this psychological technique or that psychological technique, that might be BS. I think he really does understand psychology well enough to control a crowd. Yeah. And that's where I think he gets really, really interesting.
But I mean, what I think about he's a great conjurer, but then so is Jamie Ian Swiss, so is the amazing Randy, so Penn and Taylor. There are several of them. And what they make, the message I get from that is that what looks like a miracle isn't. And my emotion screams at me, this is a miracle, it's got to be a miracle. But it's not. And the same thing, I generalize that to the big problems, like, are you really asking me to believe that the universe started as a random quantum fluctuation and then grew up through inflation and things? That seems, I can't believe that. That's incredible. You cannot be serious. No, that's exactly my reaction to a great conjurer. And that's only a trick. Well, in the same way, the universe starting from a random quantum fluctuation and nothing annihilating itself and becoming something, whatever it is, that's equally hard to believe. And the fact that conjurers can fool you gives me the confidence to say, because that's a trick, and there really is a scientific explanation for that, we should not lose confidence in the ability to explain the origin of the universe by science. I'm not saying that's a trick, of course I'm not, that's another matter entirely. But our instinctive incredulity is something we should strive and struggle to overcome.
Your laundry list of extraordinary books point at a life mission that you then echo precisely on your website. You just come out and flat say, like, I'm trying to bring the world to rationality and a more secular understanding so that we can move forward in a way that's productive. Is there, and so your life mission, that becomes very understandable. Is there a way that you think the specific things that you touch on from an evolutionary biological perspective become usable in somebody's day-to-day life? So take me, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but I use these things tremendously. Like when I think about demographics and I think about telling a story, I need to understand the differences in my audience, where somebody is developmentally when they're a child, where they are as an adult, where they are as a male, as a female. To understand that, and I have found that putting that in an evolutionary context has been tremendously helpful, and even just understanding my own emotions, where they come from, why I should or shouldn't listen to them. What are things that you want people to take away in their daily life?
I don't use my science very much in that way to try to get where my audience is coming from. I don't think I quite do what, I mean, I understand what you're doing and I respect that, but I don't think I really do that.
Do you think so? More than I'm asking if you do it, because your mission is very clear. You're, I'll say, operating at a societal level. And now I'm asking at a personal level. So if somebody reads your books, let's say they read all of them, do you think that there's an amalgamation of information there that allows them to steer their own life instead of just trying to steer society?
I would hope that if they come to a scientific worldview, they would lead a better, more fulfilled life. I would hope that if they understand about life, about where they come from, where they themselves come from, their ancestors, where they come from in evolution, I would hope that they would feel more satisfied with living because they know where they come from, they understand the world in which they live, the process that gave rise to them. That's what I would want to achieve. I think that somebody who dies without ever knowing why they were born in the first place has died deprived of something important.
Do you think there is a why, or do we decide that why?
There is a what?
You said if somebody dies without knowing why they were born.
By why I simply meant the causal chain that led to their existence. I didn't mean a purpose.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I don't use the language of purpose.
Yeah. If somebody were to ask you what's the meaning of life, what would you say?
Well, I would say on the one hand, the meaning of life is propagation of your selfish genes. On the other hand, I would say you make your own meaning, and we all do that, and we lead a better life if we develop something important. I mean, if in your case you have a media company, and that's very fulfilling. In my case, I write books and give lectures. That's very fulfilling. Somebody else writes music or plays music. There are all sorts of ways you can give meaning to your life, your personal relationships, your love for your spouse and your children, etc. These all give meaning to life.
Do you look at that any differently? Like knowing the evolutionary biological reasons for love? I know that you've had a long-lasting marriage.
Not really. No, I don't think I think I just behave like a human being in that respect.
And just go through, feel it. It's interesting because the reason that I asked my earlier question is, for me, I have needed to be able to visualize the process. Once I could understand, like I'll even just put it in evolutionary terms. Once I understood evolutionarily what was going on, why emotions were arising the way that they were arising, why my brain was developed in sort of this tri-layered thing, that there's, basically your lizard brain, your mammalian brain, your neocortex. Once I could understand all of that, I could go, oh, I see, like this fear response that I'm having, I don't need to just act in accordance with it. I can actually use my prefrontal cortex to interrupt the signal. I can use what I call physiological hooks, so breathing from your diaphragm, which I'd actually love to know if you know why that works so well. But breathing from your diaphragm when you're meditating instantly begins to shift you out of fight or flight and into the parasympathetic. And so as I began to think of myself as a biological system, the doors of the universe opened to me. And so one of the weirdest episodes I ever did of Conversations with Tom, the show that we're doing right now, I got into this like two ships passing in the night. The other person that I was talking to was just convinced there was like a mystical thing. And I was just like, dude, we're biological material. Phineas Gage, I'm sure. And so Phineas Gage, railroad spike through his head, never the same after it. I'm like, the notion that there's some part of me that survives beyond my soul, or that is in any way different than the sum total of my biology, is crazy. And so once I understood, I'm a biological machine, but I have, even if Sam Harris is right and that my free will is a total delusion, I feel like a rider on an elephant.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I agree with that. And of course, the Phineas Gage type evidence means there's no question about it. We are nothing but our brains. But nevertheless, when you're in love, it doesn't diminish from it that you know it's just brain stuff and hormones that's going on. It's still an intense emotion.
Yeah, I think that is arguably the most important thing that somebody could derive from your work. Is you go into the biology, you talk about the evolution, you look plainly at whether religion is likely to be true or not, but I feel like you hand people an entryway to a universe of just unimaginable beauty.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about The Greatest Show on Earth.
This is my book on the evidence for evolution. The full quote is, "The greatest show on earth, the only game in town," which is, I think, a circus thing. So it really is just simply laying out why we know that Darwinian evolution is true, and so it goes through all the evidence, yes, one of the books I'm proud of.
And what is it that is so awe-inspiring in that you called it The Greatest Show?
But the product of the only game in town is the immense diversity of life, the complexity of life, the elegance of it, the profoundly convincing illusion of design, the sheer beauty of it. That is all produced by a very, very simple physical process. And so it is the only game in town, and the product is the greatest show on earth.
And as somebody who, I'm assuming you believe when we die, it's essentially like a light switch, you're just out and it's done. How does that influence how you think about living?
It makes me want to live life to the full and to encourage other people to do the same. It's the only life we've got. So let's live it to the full, and let's leave the world a better place than we found it.
I think that is a perfect place to wrap up. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I have been blown away by your work for years. And I'm just grateful that you put it out there. And I know that at times it is maybe a little tumultuous, but I respect that you just keep going, man. So
thank you very much
for everything
indeed.
you've done. It was an honor to have you on the show.
Great,
all right, everybody, that's it. You should follow this man. You should read all of his books. You can go to richarddawkins.net. You can learn more about his campaign to change the world for the better there. But drop his name into Amazon. You will get a laundry list of extraordinary books. I recommend them all. All right, everybody, peace out.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
We are now hackable animals, that we have the technology to decipher what you think, what you want, to predict human choices, to manipulate human desires in ways which were never possible before.